a vanished risotto, and a chef found cold. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me your city. I enjoy every comment. Wolfe tastes trouble simmering. It was on one of those bleak November evenings when the fog lay heavy over London, wrapping the city in a pall of grey mystery, that Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves unexpectedly drawn into one of the most singular cases in our long acquaintance. I'd been out visiting a patient in Paddington, and upon returning to Baker Street, found Holmes standing at the window, his tall figure outlined against the faint glow of gaslights filtering through the mist. He did not turn as I entered, but his voice, calm, incisive, and with that peculiar edge of restrained excitement that I had come to recognize, greeted me at once. "You are late, Watson. I trust Mrs. Hudson's new cook did not detain you." "How in the world did you know I stopped at the cafe on Marylebone Road?" I exclaimed, pulling off my gloves. Holmes smiled faintly. "Your left cuff bears a small smudge of truffle oil, a rarity found only in the sauce served at Le Pommier. Moreover, the faint aroma of mushrooms clings to your coat. I concluded you had indulged in a late luncheon." I could only laugh. "One day, Holmes, I shall enter by the ceiling to see if that will confound you. Even then, my dear Watson, I should know it was you by the creak of the floorboard above." Before I could reply, there came a sharp rap at the door, followed by Mrs. Hudson's voice announcing a visitor. "Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Ah, our evening promises diversion. Show him in." Lestrade entered, his coat damp from the fog, his expression a mixture of irritation and puzzlement. He wasted no time in formalities. "Holmes, I have a case that'll suit your taste for the absurd. The sort of thing that makes the Yard look like fools if we handle it alone." Holmes gestured to the armchair by the fire. "Pray sit, Lestrade, and enlighten us." "It's a matter of theft. Or worse," said Lestrade, producing a small notebook. "The incident occurred this afternoon at Lord Wexford's townhouse in Grosvenor Square. He was hosting a private luncheon, a most exclusive affair, when his chef's pièce de résistance vanished. The dish, a mushroom risotto prepared with an imported white truffle from Piedmont, disappeared from the kitchen moments before being served." I could not help but smile. "Surely, Lestrade, you did not come all this way about a missing dish?" Lestrade gave me a sour look. "I might have thought so myself, Doctor, until the chef was found unconscious beside the stove. Poisoned." Holmes's expression sharpened. "Poisoned, you say?" "Aye. And here's the devil of it. No one touched the dish after it left the pan. The truffle was worth hundreds of pounds, and the guests included Lady Fairfax, Colonel Dunn, and the Italian ambassador. Every one of them claims ignorance." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Fascinating. A vanished meal, a poisoned cook, and a room full of diplomats. I can see why you came." Lestrade nodded grimly. "Lord Wexford demands discretion. He's hosting the Prime Minister tomorrow night, and he'll have no scandal under his roof." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Indeed. Watson, I believe our dinner plans are cancelled. Fetch your coat." 2. The House of Lord Wexford. By the time our cab rattled through the iron gates of Grosvenor Square, the fog had thickened into a shroud. The mansion loomed above us, its windows glowing faintly through the haze. Within, the servants moved like nervous shadows, their whispers breaking off at our approach. We were greeted by a tall butler of austere demeanor who led us to the dining room, an elegant chamber where silver gleamed and crystal glittered in the gaslight. Holmes took in the scene with one sweeping glance, his eyes darting from the sideboard to the heavy velvet draperies. "The dish disappeared from here?" he asked. "No, sir," said Lestrade. "From the kitchen at the back, but this is where it was bound. Lord Wexford insists none of the guests left the table." Holmes smiled faintly. "And yet the risotto did." We proceeded to the kitchen, a large, spotless room now eerily silent save for the faint ticking of a clock. The chef, A Frenchman named Armand Roux lay on a narrow cot attended by a maid. He was pale, breathing shallowly, but alive. Holmes bent over him, examining the man's lips and fingernails. "Arsenic, most likely," he murmured. "A trace in the tasting spoon, perhaps?" Lestrade nodded. The doctor said much the same. But no one can explain how it got there. Holmes rose, his gaze sweeping the room. His fingers brushed over the empty serving dish, porcelain, faintly dusted with rice grains. Then he crouched near the back door, where the faintest smear of white caught his eye. "Watson," he said softly, "observe." I knelt beside him and saw what he indicated, a small trace of white powder along the door frame. "Flour," I suggested. Holmes rubbed it between his fingers, then touched it to his tongue. "No, saltpetre mixed with soot, a residue of fireworks powder. Curious." He moved next to the open window, where a faint scuff mark marred the sill. A footstep, female, judging by the heel impression. No larger than a size 4, and see, a single thread of dark silk, torn, likely from a gown. Lestrade frowned. "So the thief climbed out the window. That's madness. It's a 2-story drop." Holmes's eyes glimmered. "Then she must have had assistance, or a plan more daring than you imagine." He straightened and turned toward the doorway. "Come, Watson. I believe we must speak with Lord Wexford and his guests." Lord Wexford received us in the drawing-room, a tall man of commanding presence, with silvered hair and an expression that suggested his patience was wearing thin. He greeted Holmes with a curt nod, though I detected a flicker of relief in his eyes at our arrival. A faint scent of cigar smoke hung in the air, mingling with the aroma of extinguished candles and the lingering traces of truffle that still clung to the house like a ghost of the afternoon's misfortune. "You must understand, Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice tight. "This was not merely a meal, but a diplomatic luncheon of some delicacy. If word spreads that my chef was poisoned and my guests nearly served tainted food, it could be disastrous. The ambassador himself was here. His government is already nervous about trade negotiations. I cannot have scandal added to the list." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Discretion, Lord Wexford, is one of the rarest spices in London, but one I keep well stocked. However, truth is the main course, and I must serve it as I find it." The faintest twitch of amusement passed over the nobleman's mouth. "Then you had better begin in the dining room. My guests are still here, though not by choice. Inspector Lestrade insisted none should leave until you had spoken with them." Holmes clasped his hands behind his back, his gaze darting toward the corridor. "Excellent. The sooner we meet them, the fresher the details." We entered the dining room once more. 4 individuals sat scattered about the table, each displaying a different measure of discomfort. Closest to us sat Lady Fairfax, a widow of striking elegance whose pale blue eyes seemed to weigh and judge with every glance. Beside her was Colonel Dunn, a broad-shouldered man with a bristling grey moustache, whose patience had evidently worn thin. Next to him sat a younger man, thin and nervous, who was introduced as Mr. Percy Vale, Lord Wexford's secretary. At the far end, with impeccable posture and an expression of offended dignity, sat Signor Bellini, the Italian ambassador. Holmes offered them a polite bow. "Pray, forgive this intrusion. I hope to detain you only briefly. If we proceed logically, I trust the truth will be uncovered before the evening is out." Colonel Dunn snorted. "All this fuss over a bowl of rice. The poor devil of a chef probably dropped dead from exhaustion, if you ask me." Holmes smiled faintly. "Perhaps, Colonel, yet death seldom visits the kitchen uninvited." He turned to Lady Fairfax. "Madame, you were seated closest to the service door, I believe." "I was," she said coolly, "though I saw nothing. I was engaged in conversation with the ambassador when the butler came to announce a delay. Moments later, all was confusion. They said the chef had collapsed." Holmes regarded her steadily. And during this confusion, did anyone leave the table? She hesitated, her gloved hands tightening around the stem of her glass. I believe the colonel rose for a moment. He complained of the draught. Dunn bristled. Nonsense. I only stepped toward the fire to warm myself. If you're suggesting I pilfered a meal, madam, you're off your rocker. Holmes made a note in his pocketbook, betraying no judgment. You are quite right, Colonel. Yet curiously, one cannot stand near a fire without warming not only oneself, but one's hands. Yours, I see, bear a faint trace of soot. The colonel glanced down, visibly startled. Dash it all. Yes, I cleaned my pipe in the drawing-room before luncheon. You may ask the butler. Indeed I shall, Holmes murmured, then shifted his attention to the secretary. Mr. Vale, as Lord Wexford's assistant, I assume you oversaw the seating arrangements and the menu. The young man nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I even helped Monsieur Roux fetch the truffle from the pantry. It arrived sealed in a glass jar this morning. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Ah, a glass jar. Did you open it yourself? Vale shook his head. No, the chef insisted on doing so. He said the scent must be preserved until the last possible moment. He opened it just before cooking. Were you present when he did? No, sir. He sent me to fetch wine for the ambassador. Holmes tapped his notebook thoughtfully. A brief absence, yet opportunity often lurks in such gaps. And you, Signor Bellini, perhaps you can tell us whether this truffle was indeed from Piedmont? The ambassador inclined his head gravely. Si, it was genuine. I could tell from the aroma. I've eaten hundreds, but in my country we treat the truffle as sacred. To poison it, mamma mia, that is an insult beyond reason. Holmes regarded him closely, then said in a quieter tone, You seem unusually certain that the poison was in the truffle. Bellini blinked. Was it not? Holmes's eyes flickered. That remains to be seen. For a moment, silence fell across the room, broken only by the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Holmes closed his notebook and turned toward Lestrade. Tell me, Inspector, who among the household staff had access to the kitchen? Only the chef, 2 maids, and the footman who served at table, Lestrade replied. The butler was supervising. Holmes nodded slowly. And this footman, where is he now? In the pantry, frightened half to death. Holmes straightened his coat. Let us hear his tale. We followed Lestrade through a narrow passage to the pantry, where a young man stood pale and trembling beside a stack of silver trays. He started as we entered. I swear, sir, he stammered, I never touched the dish. I only carried the soup. The risotto never even reached the dining room. Calm yourself, Holmes said softly. No one accuses you. Tell me what you observed in the kitchen before the chef collapsed. The footman swallowed hard. He was stirring the pan, muttering about the heat being wrong. Then I heard a clatter. Something fell near the back door. When I turned, I saw a shadow pass by the window. Just a flash, like someone moving quickly outside. Holmes leaned closer. Did you see their face? No, sir. Only that they wore something dark, and there was a faint spark, like a match being struck. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A match, you say? Curious indeed. He turned sharply toward Lestrade. Inspector, I shall need to examine the exterior wall beneath that window at once. There is more to this theft than hunger or spite. Someone sought to conceal a greater crime beneath the triviality of a vanished meal. Lestrade frowned. You mean the poison wasn't meant for the chef? Holmes' gaze was distant, already racing ahead. Perhaps not. Perhaps the true dish intended for ruin was never eaten at all. With that enigmatic remark, he strode toward the rear corridor, his shadow long and spectral against the flickering gaslight, and I followed, the thrill of unfolding mystery tightening its grip upon my heart. The night had grown heavier still when we stepped into the small courtyard behind Lord Wexford's townhouse. A dense fog clung to the cobblestones, coiling around the gas lamps and dulling their glow. The air was thick with damp soot and the faint scent of coal smoke drifting from the mews beyond the wall. Holmes moved ahead of us with the quiet certainty of a bloodhound that had caught the scent of its prey. His lantern cast a trembling pool of light as he crouched below the kitchen window, studying the ground with the keen scrutiny of one reading a secret script written in dust. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, pointing to the sill. "The same trace of saltpeter we found inside. And here, a heel mark, light but distinct. Our visitor landed neatly. The earth is soft. I would say it is less than an hour old." I bent close and saw the faint impression of a delicate shoe, just as he had described earlier. "A woman, then?" I asked quietly. "Most assuredly, and one accustomed to stealth. Note the even pressure. No stumble, no hesitation. Whoever she is, she has done this before." Lestrade muttered something about acrobatic ladies and thieves' guilds, but Holmes ignored him. His lantern beam glided toward a set of footprints leading toward the garden gate. He followed them until they vanished near a row of tall hedges, where a patch of disturbed gravel suggested a hurried departure. Holmes stooped once more, plucked something from the ground, and held it up between his fingers. It was a small bent matchstick, one end charred. "A match," he said softly, "struck hastily, perhaps to light a fuse, or a lantern. Yet there is no wax dripped nearby, no remains of candlelight. Curious indeed. She carried her own means of illumination, but briefly and in secrecy." Lestrade frowned. "And what in heaven's name does that have to do with a bowl of risotto?" Holmes gave a dry smile. "Patience, Inspector. In this city, the smallest flame can illuminate the darkest motive." He straightened and handed me the matchstick for safekeeping, then turned back toward the house. "Come, Watson. There is someone else I wish to see. The butler, if you please. I have long found that the servants of a household, while invisible to its masters, often hold the clearest view of events." We returned inside, the warmth of the kitchen feeling almost oppressive after the chill of the courtyard. The butler, a tall, severe man with graying hair, stood waiting near the door, his hands folded with the precision of habit. His name, I learned, was Mr. Bristow. Holmes regarded him with polite detachment. "Mr. Bristow, you have served Lord Wexford many years." 18, sir." "And in that time, have you ever known the chef, Monsieur Roux, to suffer any enemies among the staff?" The butler hesitated. "He was exacting, Mr. Holmes. Proud of his craft, but though he scolded often, I cannot say he was hated. Still, he quarrelled with the footman this morning." "Ah." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Over what matter?" "The serving schedule. Monsieur Roux complained that his dishes were delayed by poor timing, and young Peter, the footman, retorted. I was obliged to separate them." Holmes tapped his chin thoughtfully. "And yet this same footman was terrified when we met him. Fair Mr. Bristow can wear many masks, guilt among them. One last question. Were any parcels or deliveries made this morning besides the truffle jar?" The butler frowned. "Only one, sir. A small wooden crate from the import office. It was addressed to the chef personally." Holmes turned sharply. "And you saw it delivered?" "Yes, sir. He signed for it himself. Said it contained a new cooking implement from Italy." Holmes's gaze sharpened like a blade. "Describe the crate." "Unmarked, sir. Perhaps a foot long, nailed shut. I believe he opened it in the pantry." Holmes was silent for a long moment, then murmured, "A box from Italy, a truffle from Piedmont, an ambassador in attendance. The web tightens, Watson." He motioned for me to follow and strode briskly toward the pantry. There, on a low table, lay a scattering of straw and the faint outline where a box had rested. Holmes crouched, inspecting the remnants with a magnifying lens. After a few moments, he uttered a low sound of satisfaction. "Gunpowder residue," he whispered. mixed with the same saltpeter and soot compound we found outside. This box carried more than a culinary tool. Lestrade leaned forward. You're suggesting the chef was sent an explosive. Not an explosive, Holmes corrected, but something that could be made into one. Recall, the match was struck outside the window. Our mysterious lady had the means to ignite, yet she did not. Why? Because the powder was removed before she could use it. Someone intercepted the true purpose of this delivery. Someone who realized too late the danger it posed. The inspector looked puzzled. And the poison? Holmes smiled faintly. A clumsy attempt at redirection, perhaps, to make the incident appear domestic and harmless. A mere kitchen mishap. But the intent, my dear Lestrade, was not to kill a chef. It was to send a message, or perhaps silence one. He rose, dusting off his knees, and turned toward Lord Wexford's study. There is one more person who may shed light on this. The ambassador himself. A man of diplomacy cannot afford to have enemies in the kitchen, yet politics often breeds them. We found Signor Bellini pacing before the fire, his expression stormy. Holmes entered without preamble. Signor, the crate delivered this morning. Did it come from your country's consulate? The ambassador stiffened. I do not concern myself with kitchen affairs. Yet you knew the truffle's origin. You knew it was genuine, Holmes said softly. And I suspect you know more. Monsieur Roux was once employed at your embassy in Rome, was he not? A muscle twitched in the ambassador's jaw. Years ago, he cooked for our diplomats. Why should that matter? Holmes's voice grew quiet, deliberate. Because, Signor, your embassy dismissed him after a scandal involving forged trade manifests, papers that went missing from the consulate's vault. Rumor had it those documents were sold, and today your luncheon was interrupted by a theft, not of food, but of silence. The ambassador's face drained of color. You have no proof. Holmes' expression remained unreadable. No proof yet, but I shall find it. Whoever broke into that kitchen tonight did not seek a meal, but something hidden inside the meal. Tell me, Signor, what might a risotto conceal that could threaten your government? The ambassador said nothing, his hand trembling slightly as it rested upon the mantel. Holmes regarded him a moment longer, then turned away, his eyes alight with cold certainty. Come, Watson, he murmured as we stepped back into the corridor. The scent of truffle, arsenic, and intrigue grows thick, and beneath it all, the faintest whiff of betrayal. Holmes walked swiftly down the corridor, his expression grave but inwardly animated. I'd long since learned that such quiet intensity signaled the sharpening of his mind upon some delicate thread of reasoning. The air within the great house felt charged, as if the very walls held their breath. I followed close behind, noting that Lestrade, though skeptical as ever, was now too intrigued to voice his doubts. Holmes paused before the staircase, his eyes drawn upward to the dim landing where a faint draught stirred the curtain of an open window. Watson, he murmured. The lady's escape was too clean. Whoever aided her knew the house intimately. I begin to suspect that this affair was conceived not in haste, but in cold preparation. Before I could respond, a cry echoed faintly from the kitchen. We hurried back to find the maid who had been tending to the unconscious chef trembling beside his cot. Monsieur Roux had regained partial consciousness, muttering incoherently in his native tongue. Holmes knelt beside him instantly. Easy, my good fellow, he said softly, switching to fluent French. You are among friends. Tell me, do you recall what happened before you collapsed? The chef's eyes fluttered open, glazed with confusion. The risotto, the aroma, monsieur. I tasted it to test the salt, and then there was pain, a burning here. He touched his throat weakly. Someone tampered with it. Someone who knew where I kept my truffle jar. Holmes leaned closer. Do you suspect anyone? The man's gaze darted to the corner of the room where a small pantry door stood ajar. There was laughter, a woman's laughter, near the back door. His voice faltered, and he fell into a restless sleep once more. Holmes rose slowly, his face thoughtful. Laughter, not fear, not haste. Laughter. That, Watson, is the mark of confidence, not panic. Our mysterious lady was not fleeing discovery. She was departing satisfied. Lestrade crossed his arms. You think she came not to steal the dish, but to deliver something? Precisely. The risotto may have been but a vessel. The question is, what did it contain before our chef ever lifted his spoon? Holmes's gaze swept the kitchen again. Then, to my astonishment, he moved toward the small hearth where the soup pots cooled. He reached inside the chimney flue and withdrew a half-charred scrap of paper. Gently brushing away the soot, he revealed the faint outline of writing. Italian script, blurred by heat but still legible in parts. Manifesti di commercio, approvato dal ministro, he read aloud. His eyes flashed. Trade manifests, indeed. The missing papers from the embassy in Rome. Roux must have hidden them within the truffle crate to smuggle them into England. But to what end? I could not help my astonishment. Then the poison was intended to silence him before he could reveal their presence. Holmes nodded. Quite so. Someone wished the chef dead, the documents destroyed, and the matter dismissed as culinary misfortune. Yet our would-be assassin underestimated both the man's resilience and my appetite for puzzles. He turned to Lestrade. We must ensure Roux is guarded. He holds the key to this affair. Meanwhile, there is another element still elusive. The woman. She has nerve, agility, and knowledge of both the embassy and this house. Someone here knows her. Lord Wexford entered just then, looking pale and agitated. Mr. Holmes, this cannot continue. My guests grow impatient, and I cannot confine them all night. The ambassador threatens to leave. Holmes regarded him coolly. Let him leave if he dares. I doubt he'll wander far. His nerves betray him. He knows more than he admits. At that moment, the faint chime of a carriage bell sounded outside. Holmes turned toward the sound like a hound catching a scent. Through the fogged glass of the hall window, we saw a shadowy figure descending the front steps. A woman wrapped in a dark shawl, her silhouette slender and poised. She moved with practiced grace, unhurried, as though certain she would not be stopped. Without hesitation, Holmes snatched his hat and coat. Quickly, Watson. Lestrade, follow if you can keep up. We burst through the front door just as the woman reached the corner, her footsteps nearly silent on the slick cobblestones. Holmes moved like lightning, his stride long and sure, the mist swirling about him. She glanced back once, her face momentarily caught in the lamplight, pale, sharp, and unmistakably beautiful, with eyes that glimmered with both fear and defiance. Then she darted down a narrow alley. Holmes gave chase. I followed as best I could, my breath visible in the cold air, the echo of our pursuit bouncing off the close brick walls. But the alley ended abruptly at a wrought iron gate, and beyond it, darkness. The woman was gone. Holmes halted, surveying the ground with quick precision. A single black glove lay caught on the gate's hinge. He picked it up delicately, examining the lining. Inside, embroidered in silver thread, was a crest, a serpent coiled about a laurel. Holmes' expression darkened. The insignia of the Italian diplomatic corps. Our lady, it seems, is no common thief. She is one of the ambassador's own agents. He turned toward me, his voice low and certain. Watson, this case has outgrown Lord Wexford's dining room. We are dealing with espionage, deceit, and a web that stretches across borders. And somewhere in that web, he added, his gaze fixed upon the fog beyond the gate, is a woman who laughs at the thought of death. Holmes turned the glove over in his hand, the lamplight glinting faintly off the silver embroidery. His expression was one of quiet triumph, tempered with unease. It is as I feared, Watson. he murmured. "We are no longer navigating the petty intrigues of London society, but have stepped into the murky waters of international espionage. This emblem marks her as an operative of the Italian diplomatic service, yet she acts without her superior's knowledge. The serpent entwined with the laurel, subtle, dangerous, and reserved for those who serve outside the law." The fog swirled about us as he spoke, muffling the sounds of distant wheels. Lestrade stumbled up a moment later, panting. "Blazes, Holmes, she's vanished. Not a trace of her down that alley." Holmes slipped the glove carefully into his coat pocket. "On the contrary, Inspector, she has left a trace more valuable than footprints. This emblem confirms her identity. There are few women in Europe permitted to wear it." He gave a thin smile. "In fact, I can name only one." We followed him back toward Grosvenor Square, the gas lamps flickering dimly in the mist. "You know her?" I asked, astonished. "I know of her," Holmes corrected. "Countess Lucia Ferretti, a most remarkable woman, educated in Florence, fluent in 4 languages, and trained by the Italian state to perform tasks of subtle diplomacy. It is said she once recovered a set of stolen treaties by masquerading as a governess in Vienna. Yet she has long since fallen from favor. Her methods were deemed too, shall we say, independent." Lestrade let out a low whistle. "And she's here in London, breaking into kitchens for stolen papers." "Not for the papers," Holmes said quietly. "For what they represent. Someone is playing a dangerous game with trade secrets, and Countess Ferretti is either retrieving them for her country or concealing them for herself. We must determine which." As we re-entered Lord Wexford's townhouse, the atmosphere had changed perceptibly. The guests had been ushered into the drawing-room, where the fire crackled and anxious voices murmured. The ambassador stood near the hearth, his face drawn and pale. At the sight of us, his eyes flickered with apprehension. Holmes approached him with unhurried grace. "Signor Bellini, I must ask that you remain in London for the next few days. Certain matters regarding your embassy's correspondence have come to my attention." The ambassador's lips tightened. "You have no authority to detain me, Mr. Holmes." "None at all," Holmes agreed pleasantly. "But Scotland Yard does, should I choose to share my discoveries. You see, I have reason to believe that documents stolen from your own government were smuggled into this country by one of your agents. Hidden, of all places, inside a truffle shipment addressed to Lord Wexford's chef. When that scheme faltered, another hand attempted to silence the courier through poison." Bellini's composure wavered. "These are grave accusations. I know nothing of such treachery." "Then perhaps you can explain," Holmes said softly, "why the person who fled your luncheon this evening dropped this." He drew the glove from his pocket and held it before the firelight. The ambassador's eyes widened as he recognized the crest. "Madonna mia," he whispered. "Lucia, here. It cannot be." "So it seems," Holmes said, his gaze never leaving him. "You know her well, I take it?" The ambassador hesitated, then sank heavily into a chair. "Once, years ago. She was under my protection in Rome. Brilliant, but reckless. When she uncovered corruption within our ministry, she disappeared, vanished into the shadows. I was told she died in Florence." "Then the dead walk among us tonight," Holmes said. "She was here, alive and unrepentant. Tell me, signor, what motive would she have to recover these manifests?" Bellini's voice lowered to a near whisper. "Those papers, if published, could ruin men in both governments. They contain proof of illicit dealings, bribes, and forged agreements. She once swore to expose them, but if she has returned, she may seek vengeance upon those who betrayed her." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Vengeance, then, not loyalty. A dangerous passion." He turned suddenly to Lestrade. "Have 2 constables placed discreetly outside Lord Wexford's home. Our quarry may yet return for what she failed to retrieve." Lestrade nodded and departed briskly. Holmes, meanwhile, stepped toward the window and looked out into the thick fog beyond. "Watson, do you observe how silent the city seems tonight? London conceals 1,000 voices, yet at times it feels like one vast whisper. This woman moves within that silence, unseen yet heard by those who matter." I could not restrain my curiosity. But surely, Holmes, she would not risk returning here after being discovered. He turned to me with a faint smile. "Ah, but she is no ordinary fugitive. Pride will draw her back. She will not allow me to hold the upper hand. If I have guessed correctly, she will attempt to retrieve the manifests before dawn, and I mean to be waiting when she does." Lord Wexford, who had remained silent until now, approached with unease. "Mr. Holmes, this affair threatens to destroy my household. I implore you, end it quickly. What do you intend to do?" Holmes bowed slightly. "I intend, my lord, to set a table fit for our elusive guest." And so, as the hour crept toward midnight, Holmes set his plan into motion. He ordered the dining room restored precisely as it had been during the luncheon, the plates reset, the candles lit anew, even the empty porcelain dish replaced upon the sideboard. The house grew still, save for the faint ticking of the clock and the crackle of the fire in the next room. Lestrade's men took their positions outside, while Holmes, Watson, and I concealed ourselves behind the heavy velvet curtains overlooking the terrace. Minutes stretched into an hour. The air was thick with anticipation. Then, faintly, came the sound of a window latch sliding open, the softest whisper of silk against glass. Holmes's eyes gleamed through the darkness. A shadow slipped into the room, graceful as a cat, her movements deliberate, unhurried. The candlelight caught her face for an instant. The unmistakable Countess Ferretti, her expression calm, almost serene. She crossed to the sideboard and lifted the porcelain dish. Beneath it, hidden in a false bottom, lay a thin packet of papers. Holmes stepped forward silently and spoke in that low, commanding tone I knew so well. "You need not trouble yourself, Countess. The dish is already served." She froze, her eyes flashing like tempered steel as she turned to face him. "So, Mr. Holmes," she said softly, her accent lilting, "London's famous detective prefers to hide behind curtains." Holmes smiled faintly, only when expecting company of such rare distinction. For a moment, the two regarded each other for predator and equal, while the fog pressed against the windows like an audience eager for revelation. Then, with a faint, defiant smile, she replied, "Then I suggest, Mr. Holmes, you prepare yourself, for this game has only begun." And before either of us could move, the candle nearest her flared, hissed, and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The room plunged into pitch darkness, and for a moment all that could be heard was the faint hiss of the extinguished flame and the quickened rhythm of our breathing. Then came the light rustle of silk, soft but swift, followed by the click of a latch. Holmes moved instantly, his outline a blur as he sprang toward the sound, but the Countess was quicker still. A window creaked open, a draught swept through the room, and by the time Lestrade struck a match, the space was empty save for the faint scent of truffle and perfume intermingled in the air. "Gone!" Lestrade cried, darting toward the open casement. "Vanished into the night again! Blast her!" Holmes stood in silence, eyes sweeping the room like lanterns in the dark. "Not vanished," he said softly. "Escaped, but not unscathed. Watson, the candle. Quickly." I lit the nearest taper and brought it to him. Holmes was crouched over the floorboards near the table, his gaze fixed on a small glint beside the rug. He picked up what appeared to be a broken clasp, delicate, gilt-edged, and shaped like a coiled serpent. The same insignia that adorned the glove. "Her brooch," he murmured. "It must have caught upon the curtain during her flight. She left in haste, and haste is the mother of mistakes." He examined the clasp closely, then stood, deep in thought. "Lestrade, station your men along the south mews and the garden perimeter. She will not have gone far. This fog is too thick for a clean getaway, and she'll know pursuit is certain. No, our Countess will seek temporary refuge somewhere close, somewhere familiar. And what of the papers? I asked, glancing toward the sideboard where the false bottom dish still sat open. Holmes stepped to the table, his long fingers turning over the remaining pages. Gone, as I expected. He gave a small, humorless smile. She succeeded in the theft, but only partly. She retrieved the visible packet, not the full prize. I looked at him in surprise. Then there's more. Holmes tapped the underside of the porcelain dish. This false bottom contains 2 compartments, Watson, separated by the thinnest veneer. Our Countess was meticulous, but the maker of this contrivance, likely the chef himself, was more so. With delicate precision, he pressed against the rim. There was a faint click, and a second panel slid free, revealing a narrow strip of vellum, no larger than a bookmark. The ink upon it was faint, almost invisible. Lestrade bent forward. Looks blank to me. Holmes smiled thinly. Invisible ink, Inspector. Lemon or iodine solution. Classic choice for documents of this nature. He held the paper near the candle's flame, and slowly, faint lines began to emerge. Figures, signatures, and seals. At last, one phrase stood out clearly in English. Wexford Contract, approved by the Minister, 1891. Beneath it, the mark of the British Trade Office. Lestrade let out a low whistle. Then this isn't just Italian business, it involves our own government. Holmes nodded gravely. Precisely. A collaboration, profitable to both sides but conducted in secrecy, and now exposed to ruin by a woman wronged. Countess Ferretti seeks retribution, and she intends to wield this paper as a weapon. He slipped the document carefully into his coat. This, Watson, is the missing keystone in her design. She risked her life tonight to reclaim these records. That tells me she intends to use them soon, and publicly. Lestrade frowned. Then what's our next move? Holmes paced before the hearth, the firelight dancing along the sharp lines of his face. The Countess cannot leave London without aid, and she cannot approach her embassy without alerting Bellini. She will seek a messenger, someone unassuming, capable of crossing borders unnoticed. The chef, perhaps, if he lives, or her accomplice inside this house. He turned suddenly toward Lord Wexford, who had re-entered, pale and shaken. My lord, may I ask, does your secretary, Mr. Vale, still reside on the premises? Wexford blinked, startled. Why, yes, in the East Wing. But surely you don't suspect him? Suspect, Holmes mused, his tone unreadable. No, I observe. Mr. Vale handled the truffle shipment, arranged the luncheon, and fetched wine at the moment of the chef's poisoning. A man of quiet habits, overlooked by those he serves. Precisely the sort of man who could smuggle secrets under your very nose. Without another word, Holmes strode toward the corridor, and we followed in tense silence. The East Wing was dim and still, save for the faint tick of a clock. Holmes rapped sharply upon the secretary's door. No answer. He turned the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the chamber was neat but empty. A candle burned low on the desk, illuminating an open valise and a half-written letter. Holmes scanned it quickly. My dearest Lucia, he read aloud, the risk is too great. If you are discovered, I will not be able to shield you. I have the documents as you asked, but we must flee before morning. Lestrade swore under his breath. They're working together. Holmes's eyes glittered. Indeed, and their escape will not wait for daylight. Vale has likely gone to meet her now. There is but one place she could hope to reach before dawn. The river. A fog such as this offers perfect cover for a boat departing Westminster Pier. He turned on his heel, his coat flaring behind him. Come, Watson. If we hurry, we may yet intercept two lovers bound by treachery, and the truth itself drifting toward the Thames. We followed him out into the cold, the city whispering around us as the hunt for the Countess and her accomplice began anew beneath the shroud of London's fog. The cab rattled furiously through the mist-veiled streets as we made for the river. The gas lamps cast trembling halos upon the cobblestones, and the air carried that faint, metallic scent that heralded the Thames nearby. Holmes sat forward, eyes gleaming with that peculiar fire which always kindled in him when pursuit and intellect joined hands. His fingers drummed lightly against the window pane as he spoke in low, measured tones. "The pattern is clear now, Watson. The Countess did not intend to vanish into obscurity. She intended to announce herself. What better stage for her revelation than the river? Silent, lawless, and swarming with passage to the continent. Vale must be her courier. They mean to cross before dawn." Lestrade, seated opposite, grunted. "We've got men posted near the bridges. If they try to board a vessel, they'll not get far." Holmes smiled faintly. "If only criminals were so obliging, Inspector. No, the Countess will not risk a commercial dock, too public. She will choose something smaller, more private, a boat kept for discretion, not commerce. Lord Wexford mentioned owning a launch moored near Westminster Pier, did he not?" Lestrade frowned. "Aye, but that vessel's for pleasure, not escape." "Then it is perfect," Holmes said, leaning back as the cab jolted to a stop. "Few suspects choose the improbable. They choose the convenient." We stepped out into the choking fog, the chill cutting sharply through our coats. The vast outline of Westminster loomed like a sleeping giant behind its veil of mist. The river below moved sluggishly, dark and glimmering under the faint glow of gaslight from the embankment. Somewhere, a clock struck 1. Holmes motioned for silence and led the way down a narrow path toward the pier. Every step echoed against the planks, the sound swallowed quickly by the fog. The faint lapping of the river against the moorings was the only sign of life, until a muffled clatter reached our ears from below. Holmes raised a hand, signaling us to halt. Then, moving with extraordinary lightness, he crept forward and peered over the edge. A small launch lay moored against the piling, half shrouded in fog. A lantern burned low near the prow, and within its dim circle of light stood 2 figures. Even at that distance, I recognized the Countess's poise, the graceful tilt of her head, the calm deliberation in her movements. Beside her, Vale was bent over a small chest, his hands trembling as he fumbled with a rope. The Countess touched his arm gently, whispering something that made him falter, then straighten. Holmes's voice came low beside me, barely a breath. "There is our pair. Observe the efficiency, Watson. She leads, he follows. He is her accomplice, her shield, and her sacrifice, if need be." Before we could descend, the sound of boots on the quay betrayed our presence. Lestrade's men had arrived. Too soon, too loudly. The Countess's head turned sharply. In a heartbeat, she snatched the lantern and dashed it against the planks, plunging the pier into darkness. "Stop them!" Lestrade shouted, charging forward. The boat's engine sputtered to life, coughing once before roaring into motion. Holmes leapt down the steps with astonishing agility, and I followed, nearly losing my footing on the slick boards. Through the fog, we saw the faint outline of the launch drifting away from the pier. Holmes raised his revolver and fired once, then again. The first shot went wide. The second struck the lantern that Vale had tried to relight, shattering it and plunging their escape into total blackness. A woman's voice rose over the river, calm and defiant. "You cannot stop the truth, Mr. Holmes. It will find the light, even if I do not." Holmes's reply was lost to the rumble of the current and the sputtering of the launch as it veered into the mist. Then, abruptly, a violent crack split the night. A sharp explosion, followed by a burst of fire that flared like a ghostly bloom upon the water. The launch shuddered, its bow lifting, then sank with a hiss and a roar. For several moments, no one spoke. Only the faint echo of the detonation rippled along the fog. Then Lestrade swore softly. "Good Lord, they're gone." Holmes stood motionless, his face illuminated by the dying glow upon the river's surface. "Not gone," he said at last, his tone cold and measured. "The Countess Ferretti is too clever to perish by her own design. That explosion was not despair. It was distraction." I stared at him. "You mean she escaped?" Holmes turned to me, his gaze sharp and distant. "There was a second vessel tethered behind the launch. I glimpsed it for an instant before the flames took hold. A skiff, small enough to drift unnoticed beneath the smoke. I would wager my life she used the chaos to vanish downstream." Lestrade looked incredulous. "And Vale?" "He, I fear, was not as fortunate." Holmes replied grimly. "The Countess has many virtues, but mercy is not among them. He was useful until the end, and the end, alas, came tonight." He gazed once more into the murky current, where the last tongues of fire were dying out. "Yet she cannot flee far. The papers she stole are useless without the cipher to decode them, and that cipher, my dear Watson, is in my possession." He withdrew from his coat the strip of vellum, the faint lines glimmering as the firelight flickered over it. "This is our advantage. She will realize it soon enough, and when she does, she will come for me." Lestrade's eyes widened. "You mean to set yourself as bait?" Holmes gave that faint, inscrutable smile I had come to dread. "There are few hunters more cunning than a wounded wolf, Inspector. But even the cleverest wolf, when cornered, must reveal her den. We shall let her believe the chase is over, and then, when the time is right, we'll strike where she least expects." As we turned back toward Baker Street, the river behind us swallowed its secrets once more, but I could not shake the image of that defiant voice echoing across the fog, the laughter of a woman who had turned even disaster into strategy. Holmes walked beside me in silence, his gaze fixed ahead, and I knew that though the night's pursuit had ended, the true hunt was only beginning. The cab bore us back through the sleeping streets of London, the faintest glimmer of dawn just beginning to pale the eastern sky. Holmes sat rigid and silent, the smoke from his pipe curling about him in thin, ghostly rings. I knew that silence well. It was the silence of concentration, of mind working furiously beneath a calm exterior. The events at the river had left me shaken. The explosion, the flames reflected upon the water, the Countess's voice vanishing into the mist. Yet in Holmes's eyes there was no despair, only that peculiar intensity that always preceded his boldest deductions. "Watson," he said at last, breaking the silence, "you recall what the Countess cried before she vanished, 'The truth will find the light.'" That was no mere flourish of defiance. It was a declaration. She intends to make these papers public, and she believes she still holds the means to do so. Therefore, her first action after escape must be to establish contact with someone who can aid her, someone who can print the truth. "You mean the press?" I asked. "Precisely, but not any paper would suffice. She requires a publication both discreet and reputable enough to guarantee credibility. And there is but one such editor in London foolhardy enough to defy two governments at once. Mr. Edwin Horbury of the Westminster Gazette." Holmes tapped the ash from his pipe and leaned forward. "We go to him at once." The cab drew up before the Gazette's offices on the Strand, where the gas lamp still burned faintly against the grey of early morning. The porter, startled by our arrival, led us into a small office smelling of ink and damp paper. Mr. Horbury, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a suspicious eye, received us with visible irritation. "I've been up all night over the Home Office scandal," he said shortly. "If you've come about that, you're late. Every reporter in London has." "Not the Home Office," Holmes replied, producing a calling card. "We seek information regarding a woman, an Italian countess, who may have approached you in the past hour." The man's brows rose slightly. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Yes, a lady called not long before dawn, said she had papers that would shake Europe to its core. Offered me an exclusive if I printed her statement without delay." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And did you accept?" Horbury gave a nervous laugh. "I told her I'd print the apocalypse if it sold copies, but I'd need proof. She said she'd return within 2 hours with the final key to the cipher." Then she vanished into the fog. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. 2 hours, Watson. The Countess will return here to complete her work, and when she does, we must be waiting. We concealed ourselves in an adjoining room that overlooked the editor's office. Holmes stood at the window, his expression cold and patient. The city outside stirred slowly to life. The clip of hooves, the cry of newsboys, the rattle of carts. Yet inside that narrow room, time seemed suspended. At last, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The door opened, and the Countess Ferretti stepped inside. She was dressed in dark traveling clothes now, her hair pinned neatly beneath a veil, her composure flawless. Holmes tensed, but did not move. She placed a small packet upon the desk before Horbury. "Here is the cipher," she said, "the proofs you required. Publish this, and history will remember your name." Horbury reached for the papers, but before his hand could touch them, Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the still air. "That will suffice, Countess." Her head turned slowly. There was neither surprise nor fear in her eyes, only the faintest trace of amusement. "You are relentless, Mr. Holmes. I thought the Thames had swallowed you." "The Thames keeps its secrets," Holmes said evenly. "But I do not. You overplayed your hand tonight. Your accomplice is dead, your allies silenced. Give me the papers, and perhaps I can spare you the worst consequences of treason." "Treason," she echoed softly. "No, Mr. Holmes. Truth. I sought only to expose the corruption that destroyed my name." Her voice was calm, almost weary. "Those men sold state secrets for profit, then blamed me when I uncovered them. I fled, disgraced, hunted. Would you have me remain silent while they thrive?" For a moment, even I felt the weight of her conviction. There was no madness in her tone, only the desperate fire of someone wronged too deeply. But Holmes's reply was cool and precise. "You mistake motive for morality, Countess. What you hold could plunge 2 nations into chaos. The guilty may suffer, but so will the innocent. I cannot permit that." Her gaze softened, and she sighed faintly. "Then you leave me no choice." She turned swiftly, snatching a small pistol from beneath her cloak. I cried out, but Holmes was faster. His hand struck her wrist, the weapon clattering harmlessly to the floor. Lestrade, who had waited in the hall, rushed in and seized her arm. Holmes retrieved the packet she had brought and glanced inside. The papers were genuine, the stolen manifests decoded and annotated in her own hand. He closed them carefully and handed them to Lestrade. "The truth will find its light, Countess," he said quietly. "But in its proper time and by cleaner hands." She met his gaze for a long moment and then, to my astonishment, smiled. "You are a dangerous man, Mr. Holmes. One day, perhaps, you will understand me." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "I already do." As Lestrade led her away, dawn broke fully over London. The first rays of light crept through the windows, falling across the desk where her papers had lain. Holmes watched them in silence, the faint glow reflecting in his eyes like the remnants of a fading fire. "The game is done, Watson," he said softly. "Yet I cannot help but feel that we have defeated a woman who might have been a hero, had the world been kinder." And with that melancholy observation, he turned toward the door, his tall figure framed by the rising light, leaving behind the scent of truffle, ink, and unfinished justice. The morning light had scarcely brightened the narrow streets when Holmes and I returned to Baker Street. The city was shaking off its slumber. Milk carts rattled over the cobbles, and the first of the newsboys were already calling the early edition. Yet the noise and bustle of London seemed far away from Holmes, whose mind remained fixed upon the events of the night. He removed his coat with deliberate calm, but I could see from the sharpness of his movements that the case had not yet released its hold upon him. He went straight to the fireplace laid a log upon the embers, and stood with his back to the flames, his expression unreadable. "Watson," he said quietly, "there is a curious dissonance in this affair, one that does not sit easily with me." I set my hat upon the stand. "You mean the Countess, I presume?" Indeed, everything she told us in that office was both true and false at once. True in motive, false in design. She spoke of justice, yet acted through deceit. She decried corruption, yet wielded stolen secrets as her weapon. Such contradictions are not born of malice. They are born of desperation, and that, my dear Watson, suggests a story not yet told. Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered with the Morning Post upon a tray. Holmes sifted through the letters absently, unpaid bills, invitations, advertisements, until his hand paused upon one envelope of heavy parchment, sealed with crimson wax and bearing no mark but the impression of a serpent coiled about a laurel. His eyes narrowed. "Ah," he murmured, "Our Lady of the Fog writes swiftly." He broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his gaze moving rapidly over the page. Then he passed it to me. The handwriting was elegant, confident, unmistakably hers. "Mr. Holmes, I am indebted to you for your efficiency. You have spared me the burden of a trial I might not have survived. Yet do not mistake restraint for defeat. The truths you now hold are like seeds. They will grow, whether you will it or not. When next you read the papers, remember this night and ask yourself which of us truly served justice. L.F." Beneath her initials, of all, faint smudge of perfume lingered, a ghost of her presence. Holmes took the letter back and held it to the light. The postmark, Southwark. That letter was sent within the last 2 hours. Impossible that she could have arranged it from custody. Therefore, "She has escaped," I exclaimed. Holmes's lips tightened. "Precisely. Lestrade's triumph will be short-lived." He paced the floor, the letter still in his hand. The Countess never intended to remain long in confinement. Her capture was a delay, not a defeat. She must have arranged her escape before we even confronted her. The question, Watson, is how? He rang for the morning paper. When it arrived, he spread it open across the table. There, on the front page, in bold type, was the answer. "Prison van overturned. Notorious Italian spy escapes in the night." I read aloud. "The woman arrested at the offices of the Westminster Gazette, believed to be implicated in the theft of international documents, escaped during transport to Holloway. The police are investigating claims that she was aided by an accomplice disguised as an officer. Inspector Lestrade has declined to comment." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a peculiar light. Not surprise, but grim admiration. A staged accident, timed to perfection. She likely boarded the replacement carriage herself. I did not misjudge her courage, Watson. Only her reach. He folded the paper neatly and set it aside. She will not flee England. Not yet. There remains one final act in her performance, one that requires London as its stage. She intends to publish the documents elsewhere, perhaps abroad, but she will first ensure that their existence becomes known. Scandal is a weapon that need only be whispered to be fatal. He moved to his desk and drew forth the vellum cipher, still sealed within its envelope. This, however, she does not possess. Without it, her stolen papers are little more than curiosities. Therefore, she must come for it, and she will choose the surest route to reclaim it. I frowned. "You mean, through you?" "Exactly so. There are but 2 men in London who know the cipher's whereabouts, myself and Lestrade. And she will never risk approaching the Yard again. No, Watson, she will come to Baker Street." The notion chilled me. "You mean to bait her?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Bait her? My dear fellow, I need do nothing. The Countess is a creature of precision. She cannot abide an incomplete design. Tonight she will come to finish her work, and when she does, we shall be waiting." He opened his violin case and withdrew not the instrument, but a revolver, which he placed neatly upon the mantel, Then, from beneath his desk, he drew out a small brass lantern and a coil of thin cord. A simple snare, yet effective. I have no doubt our guest will appreciate the irony. As he worked, I found myself watching him in uneasy silence. The fire cast long shadows across the room, and the first hints of evening crept through the window. Holmes's movements were deliberate, his face calm, but I knew beneath that composure lay the quiet tension of a hunter awaiting his quarry. "Watson," he said at last, glancing toward me, "you may wish to ready your revolver. The Countess Ferretti will not come with pleading or apology. When she returns, it will be to reclaim what she has lost, and perhaps to settle the score between us once and for all." The clock struck 8. Outside, the city murmured with the distant rattle of carriages. Inside, Baker Street seemed to hold its breath, and somewhere beyond that fog-wrapped horizon, a woman who laughed at danger was already on her way back to the one man clever enough to stop her. The fog had returned by evening, rolling in from the river in soft, spectral folds that pressed against the windows of Baker Street. The lamps outside were little more than dim halos of gold suspended in the gloom. Inside, the fire burned low, and all the warmth of the room seemed concentrated upon Holmes himself, as he sat motionless in his armchair, his eyes fixed upon the mantel clock. Every tick of that clock fell like a countdown, patient and precise. I had not spoken for some time. I knew better than to disturb his concentration when the air in the room felt so electric, so finely strung. At last, when the clock struck 11, Holmes stirred. "She will come within the hour," he said quietly. "A mind like hers moves with symmetry. She escaped at 11 the previous night, and she will complete her circle tonight. It is not merely cunning, it is theatrical, and the Countess is nothing if not a performer." I loaded my revolver and checked the window shutters, though I doubted either would serve against the force of will that woman possessed. Holmes had extinguished all but one lamp, leaving the room cloaked in shadow. He sat beside the desk, upon which the envelope containing the vellum cipher rested in plain view, like bait set in a trap. The minutes passed with aching slowness. At 11:30, the silence was broken by a soft creak upon the stair. Holmes raised a finger to his lips, and we both turned toward the door. The handle moved once, hesitated, then turned fully. The door opened without sound, and she stood framed against the faint light from the hall. The Countess Ferretti, veiled in black, her presence as composed and deliberate as ever. "Good evening, Mr. Holmes," she said softly. "I thought it would be ungentlemanly of me to depart London without returning your courtesy." Holmes rose, bowing slightly. "I confess, Countess, I doubted even your ingenuity could secure freedom so swiftly. Your letter was a masterpiece of provocation." She smiled faintly. "You understand me well enough to know that I could not bear an unfinished symphony. I came only to take what is mine." Her gaze moved to the envelope upon the desk. "You have what I need, Mr. Holmes. The cipher. Without it, all I have fought for becomes meaningless." Holmes gestured toward the paper. "Indeed, Countess. But before you claim it, allow me a final question. Why risk so much for exposure? You could have sold those documents to any power in Europe and lived in comfort for the rest of your days." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, her voice held something like sorrow. "Because comfort is the reward of the guilty, Mr. Holmes. I was made their scapegoat, condemned for a crime I tried to prevent. They destroyed my name to preserve their own. What remains to a woman but her truth? I will see it printed if it costs me my life." Holmes regarded her in silence. Then, with a slow motion, he lifted the envelope and held it between his fingers. "You speak of truth, Countess, yet the truth is seldom kind. Publish these, and you destroy not only those who wronged you, but hundreds more whose hands are clean. The trade deals your documents expose fund relief efforts, schools, even hospitals. Would you see them ruined to vindicate yourself?" Her composure wavered, just for a heartbeat. "They will rebuild." I cannot. Holmes stepped closer, his tone quiet but piercing. You think vengeance is justice, but justice demands clarity, not flame. You are a brilliant woman, Countess. Yet you have let rage blind you. Those documents are forged. She froze. Forged? By your own accomplice, Holmes said, his voice firm now. Vale was no idealist. He used you. The forgeries bear subtle discrepancies. The dates altered, the signatures mimicked but not matched. I examined them this morning. He meant to sell them to your enemies once you delivered the cipher. She shook her head, though I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. You lie. He loved me. Holmes's expression softened, almost pitying. Perhaps he did. But love and loyalty are rarely allies. Vale's letter, which you left behind in your haste, made that clear. He wrote of your danger, yes, but also of his price. He had arranged to sell both the genuine and false papers to a broker in Antwerp. His death was not your tragedy, Countess. It was his justice. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment she stood utterly still, the truth washing through her like cold water. Then, slowly, she sank into the nearest chair, her gloved hands trembling slightly. So, she murmured, I have fought ghosts all along, betrayed by my own. Holmes placed the envelope upon the desk before her. Take it if you wish. You have earned the right to know, but know also that this cipher completes a fiction, not a revelation. If you publish it, you expose yourself, not your enemies. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the quiet crackle of the fire. Then, with a movement as deliberate as it was weary, the Countess reached for the envelope. Her eyes lingered upon it, then lifted to meet Holmes's. No, Mr. Holmes, she said softly. I see now that you have already won. I will not give them the satisfaction of watching me fail again. She rose, her composure restored, though her voice was hollow now. You are right. Truth is seldom kind. Keep it then, and do with it as your conscience dictates. Holmes inclined his head. It shall remain where it belongs, buried with the lies that birthed it. She turned toward the door, pausing only once at the threshold. Had I met you in another life, Mr. Holmes, she said quietly, I might have been your ally. He gave a slight bow. And I, yours, Countess. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the stair. I moved to the window and caught one last glimpse of her figure dissolving into the fog, her black veil fluttering like smoke. Holmes stood silent for some moments, his gaze upon the empty chair she had left behind. At last, he spoke, his tone reflective. There, Watson, goes one of the most formidable minds of our age, lost not to crime, but to disillusionment. The world has little mercy for those who think too deeply upon its hypocrisies. I said nothing. The fire had burned low, and the fog outside pressed close against the glass, as though eager to reclaim its secrets. Holmes crossed to the hearth and dropped the envelope into the flames. We watched as the parchment curled, darkened, and was consumed, the cipher that had caused so much turmoil vanishing into ash. When it was done, Holmes turned away from the hearth, his face serene once more. There, my dear Watson, he said quietly, ends the matter of the missing risotto, an affair seasoned with deception, stirred by ambition, and finished, as all things are, by truth. He sank into his chair, took up his violin, and drew the bow gently across the strings. The melancholy notes filled the room, rising and falling like a requiem for all that might have been. And as I listened, I found myself wondering, not for the first time, whether the genius I so admired also carried within it the same loneliness that haunted every soul touched by the pursuit of truth. Outside, London slept beneath its veil of fog, and Baker Street, ever watchful, kept its silent vigil over the mysteries of the human heart.